All right, picture this. You walk into a store, pick up a t-shirt, and right there on the tag it says, made with sustainable cotton. You feel good, right? Like you're making a solid, ethical choice. But here's the thing. Behind that little green tag is a massive, multi-billion-dollar global supply chain. And honestly, it is way more complex and way more vulnerable to exploitation than those marketing campaigns want us to believe. So today, we're pulling back the curtain. Welcome to This Explainer. We're going to completely deconstruct the architecture of sustainability in the textile industry. We'll figure out exactly how it works, where it completely falls apart, and why that shirt you're wearing right now might not actually be as green as you think.
It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? Is your sustainable cotton actually sustainable? Look, over the last 10 years or so, our demand for ethical fashion has just skyrocketed. We all want environmentally friendly farming, fair labor, zero toxic chemicals, the whole shebang. But as our demand goes up, so does the immense pressure on these global supply chains to pump out certified materials. And, well, wherever there's massive pressure and a ton of profit to be made, the risk of fraud and misrepresentation absolutely explodes. To really get to the bottom of this, we have to look way past the clever marketing and dig into the actual bedrock of how sustainability is proven in the first place. And that brings us to the ultimate foundation of trust in this industry: traceability. In simple terms, traceability is just the ability to track and verify the entire journey of a raw material, from the dirt on the farm all the way to the finished product hanging in your closet. Here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Without bulletproof traceability, sustainability claims are literally just empty words. If a brand can't prove exactly where their cotton came from, or how it was handled at every single spinning mill and dye house along the way, then that certification is basically meaningless. It's the harsh reality of hoping something is sustainable versus actually knowing for a fact that it is. So, to tackle this massive traceability problem, two giant systems have basically taken over the landscape: the Better Cotton Initiative, usually just called BCI, and the Global Organic Textile Standard, or GOTS. Now, you might assume they're playing by the exact same rules, right? Actually, no. They represent two fundamentally contradictory approaches. Let's break them down. Let's start with the Better Cotton Initiative, or BCI. Their entire system is built on a core mechanism called a mass balance system, and this is absolutely vital to understand. Mass balance is essentially an administrative model. It tracks the total volume of certified material entering a supply chain rather than tracking the actual physical fiber itself. Think of it kind of like putting clean energy into a local power grid. You know you added, say, wind power to the grid, but when you turn on your TV at home, you have literally no idea if the specific electrons powering your screen came from a wind turbine or a coal plant down the street. BCI works the exact same way, just with cotton. Because they use this mass balance system, BCI focuses super heavily on farm-level agricultural practices, things like cutting down on water and pesticide use, which is great. But once that cotton leaves the farm, it's tracked purely through sheer volume accounting. Crucially, this means BCI actually allows their cotton to be physically mixed with conventional, totally non-certified cotton at the spinning mills. A brand can buy Better Cotton credits, but the actual physical t-shirt they produce might contain exactly 0% sustainable fiber. Zero. It severely limits our ability to verify the true identity of the fiber, creating this massive disconnect between the good stuff happening on the farm and the final product you end up buying. Now, let's pivot over to the other heavyweight in the room: GOTS. The Global Organic Textile Standard operates on a completely different philosophy. It's called chain of custody, and this acts as a strict physical barrier against industry fraud. Chain of custody demands the actual physical segregation of certified materials from conventional ones at every single step of processing, no mixing allowed. It also requires verified transaction certificates to legally prove that the baton was passed correctly from the cotton gin to the spinner to the final factory. So the GOTS approach is incredibly comprehensive. By demanding that strict physical segregation and making transaction certificates mandatory at every stage, they are fiercely protecting the integrity of the fiber itself. But GOTS also goes way beyond just the farm. They enforce strict environmental and chemical restrictions during the actual manufacturing process, the dyeing and finishing stages. And they enforce serious social requirements and labor rights for the factory workers too. It's a full spectrum standard, designed from the ground up to physically guarantee the integrity of the product you're holding in your hands. So, when we put these two giants head-to-head, we find what we call the traceability gap, and the differences are honestly glaring. On one hand, you have BCI. They offer a farm-level scope with administrative, mass balance volume tracking, which inherently brings a super high risk of physical fiber mixing.
On the other hand, you have GATS. They offer a comprehensive processing scope, strict physical segregation, and verified fiber identity. It really boils down to the difference between administrative reality, like accounting on paper, and a physical reality, the actual fibers woven into the fabric. If we look at their core metrics, a pretty stark divide emerges. When it comes to transparency, BCI is moderate. They mainly focus on the farm. GOTS is strong, requiring full disclosure all the way down the line. Traceability? BCI is objectively weak because of that mass balance model we talked about, whereas GOTS is strong thanks to their rigid chain of custody. And what about governance and accountability? Well, they're both multi-stakeholder initiatives, but BCI's structure leaves some pretty notable loopholes open. GOTS, meanwhile, relies on strict independent certifiers and annual audits that can be revoked at any time. Overall, GOTS clearly outpaces BCI when we're talking about verifiable physical traceability.
But here is where this whole story gets really fascinating and, honestly, a little bit dark. What happens when these fundamentally contradictory systems operate inside the exact same supply chain? Because in the real world of global textile manufacturing, a massive spinning mill in a place like Bangladesh might literally be processing BCI cotton and GOTS cotton on the exact same factory floor, on the exact same day.
This brings us to the collision. When these overlapping, deeply contradictory certifications bump into each other in real-world facilities, they create massive systemic vulnerabilities. The simple fact that we have multiple definitions of what makes cotton sustainable, each with totally different rules for tracking it, creates this incredibly foggy environment. And in global supply chains, opacity is a fraudster's absolute best friend. Industry data shows us exactly how suppliers are actively exploiting this traceability gap. First off, we see the intentional mixing of certified and non-certified cotton, with suppliers hiding right behind those mass balance loopholes. Second, we have certification shopping. This is where a manufacturer purposely chooses to push a product through whatever the most lenient standard is, just to slap a green tag on it. Third, there is this widespread epidemic of overproducing transaction certificates, basically recycling the paperwork to cover dirty conventional cotton. And the ultimate result of all of this? Total greenwashing. Brands get to claim sustainability to you, the consumer, without ever having to ensure it actually exists in the physical product. Let me break down exactly how this fraud plays out, step by step, through something known as the double counting loophole. Step 1, a mill sources a tiny amount of certified cotton and a massive amount of cheaper conventional cotton. Step 2, they exploit those ambiguous rules in the mass balance system. Step 3, they physically blend the cheap fibers with the premium ones, knowing full well that physical detection is nearly impossible once the cotton is spun into yarn. And step 4, they falsely inflate their sustainable output on paper, selling way more certified yarn than they actually had the raw materials for. In this scenario, paper sustainability completely overrides physical reality. This perfectly aligns with an incredibly powerful piece of industry analysis. This sustainable cotton supply chain is currently compliance-driven rather than impact-driven. Just think about that for a second. The whole system has become utterly obsessed with just checking boxes on audit forms, filing endless paperwork, and securing a shiny logo for a clothing tag. But checking a box does not equal genuine environmental protection. It doesn't guarantee a farmer was actually paid a living wage. We have basically built an entire architecture of compliance, but we are completely losing sight of the actual real-world impact on the ground. So, how do we fix it? How does the global apparel industry move past these paper-based illusions and actually rebuild real trust in the supply chain? Well, the good news is the tools to solve this crisis aren't some distant sci-fi dream. They are arriving right now. We don't have to rely entirely on easily manipulated paperwork anymore. We are officially entering an era of undeniable physical and digital proof. The future of verification really relies on a few key pillars. First, the industry desperately needs harmonized cross-industry national standards. We need everyone playing by a single strict rulebook to completely eliminate that certification shopping we talked about. Second, we're seeing the rise of immutable blockchain ledgers for end-to-end tracking. Because if you digitize a transaction certificate on a blockchain, it cannot be quietly altered, duplicated, or recycled. Third, and this is truly amazing science, isotopic and DNA fiber testing. We can literally test the natural chemical fingerprint of a piece of cotton to scientifically prove the exact geographic region it was grown in. No way to fake that. And finally, centralized digital dashboards can give brands and regulators real-time visibility into the entire supply chain, spotting fraud the absolute second the numbers don't add up. Which leaves us with this final thought. The technology and the frameworks to demand total, uncompromising transparency, they exist today.
The real question is whether massive global brands will actually step up and implement them, or if they'll just continue to hide behind the very comfortable, very profitable opacity of mass balance accounting. So, next time you're shopping and you hold up a piece of clothing with a crisp green tag, I want you to ask yourself, will this garment tell the true story of its physical origin, or is it just presenting a beautifully documented sustainable illusion? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and remember to keep asking the tough questions.